Picture this. It's a Monday morning, but it's not just any Monday. It's a morning that doesn't just shake the very foundations of the global economy, it completely cracks them wide open. The clock is ticking, stock ticker tapes are flashing this violent, angry red, and desperate phone calls are echoing across trading floors everywhere. The whole world is basically watching in total disbelief as employees carry their entire lives out of a New York headquarters in cardboard boxes. This wasn't just a bad day on the market. It was an absolute catastrophe that changed the world forever.
On September 15th, 2008, a true titan of finance literally just evaporated. 158 years of rich history, prestige, and billions with a B, billions of dollars in assets, just vanished into thin air overnight. 1 minute, they're the fourth largest investment bank in the US, right? An untouchable giant of Wall Street. And the next? They're reduced to a ghost story whispered in corporate boardrooms. And here's the thing, this isn't merely the story of a bank failing. It's the story of how an entire system, a system built completely on trust, turned out to be nothing more than a fragile house of cards.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The day the world cracked. How a too-big-to-fail titan vanished. Moving right along to Section 2, building a house of cards. From dry goods to Wall Street gorilla. To really wrap our heads around the sheer magnitude of this collapse, we kind of have to hit rewind. We need to contrast their incredibly humble 19th century origins with the fiercely aggressive modern era that ultimately sealed their fate. Back in 1850, three brothers from Bavaria, Henry, Emmanuel, and Mayer Lehman, started a tiny, humble dry goods store down in Alabama. They traded cotton. But as the American dream expanded, well, so did they. Throughout the late 19th century, the firm was run by these incredibly conservative partners who very carefully built up their reputation. But fast forward to the early 2000s, and Lehman Brothers had mutated into a massive global investment banking titan. Those cautious, conservative partners, long gone, replaced by a completely new, far more ruthless breed of executive. At the helm of this wild new era was CEO Richard Fuld, or as pretty much everyone in the financial world called him, the Gorilla of Wall Street. It's an uncompromising nickname, but it fit perfectly. Fuld was fiercely aggressive and absolutely, completely obsessed with growth. Under his intense leadership, Lehman pushed harder than anyone else on the street to dominate a highly lucrative but incredibly dangerous new frontier, the mortgage market. Which brings us to Section 3, the subprime mortgage mirage, the fatal flaw of toxic debt. You see, the tragedy of Lehman Brothers didn't actually begin with an outright crime. It started with this massive, insatiable appetite for what honestly looked like the safest bet on earth at the time, the housing market. In the early 2000s, interest rates were super low, and Lehman just started gobbling up thousands of home mortgages. And this brilliantly illustrates their mindset. By 2007, Lehman's leverage ratio was a jaw-dropping 30-to-1. Really think about what that means for a second. For every single dollar of their own money they actually had, they were betting $30 of borrowed cash just to amplify their investments in housing. They were spending the currency of trust, and they were spending it lavishly. So what exactly were they buying with all that borrowed cash? They were hoarding subprime mortgages. Basically, these were home loans handed out to people with really poor credit who were highly, highly unlikely to ever pay them back. Lehman would take these incredibly toxic loans, mash them together into these wildly complex financial packages, and then sell them off to investors, falsely claiming, hey, these are safe, high-yield assets. The fatal flaw here is that Lehman totally stopped seeing the actual struggling human beings behind these loans. They only saw profit numbers. And you know what? For a little while, the mirage worked perfectly. But that mirage was incredibly fragile. Lehman was out there aggressively projecting this illusion of rock-solid stability to the world, bragging about record profits quarter after quarter. But behind the curtain, their entire business model was essentially a high-wire act with absolutely no safety net, and the winds were really starting to howl. Their sheer recklessness during this period absolutely set the stage for an unprecedented disaster. All right, Section 4, the Repo 105 illusion, the $50 billion cover-up. So in 2007, the hurricane finally hits. That seemingly unstoppable housing market, it began to cool off. Homeowners started defaulting on all those subprime loans. And suddenly, those bundled assets Lehman was holding onto, the exact same ones they swore to investors were totally rock solid, they began to rapidly, terrifyingly lose value. The toxic mortgages were failing, and that poison was spreading straight through Lehman's balance sheet. Now, I want you to ask yourself something. If you were running a normal company and your major assets suddenly started plummeting, you'd have to face the music, right?
You'd have to report those losses to your investors. But Lehman was way too deep in the game. So how do you hide a failing empire when the market absolutely demands stability? Well, they chose a completely different, much darker path to keep that illusion alive.
They turned to this shady accounting maneuver known as Repo 105. Actually, let's ditch the financial jargon for a second. Think about it like this. Imagine you are completely drowning in personal debt, but you really want to look rich for a big weekend out. So on Friday, you temporarily sell your car to a buddy for cash. You flash your full bank account over the weekend, everyone thinks you're doing great, and then on Monday, you buy the car back and you're right back in debt. That is exactly what Lehman did. Right before their quarterly reports were due, they would temporarily sell their toxic assets to another bank. They'd publish these glowing, super healthy financial statements and then quietly just buy the toxic debt right back a few days later. At this point, they weren't just gambling anymore, they were straight up cooking the books.
Now, what's really fascinating about this is the sheer mind-boggling scale of the deception. Using that Repo 105 trick, Lehman Brothers was secretly moving over $50 billion of debt off their balance sheet at the end of every single quarter. $50 billion, just temporarily hidden away to keep their dangerous game going and trick the public into thinking they were so much leaner and healthier than they actually were.
And that leads us right into Section 5, the global domino effect, from the boardroom to Main Street.
Because the truth, it always catches up. As 2008 rolled on, Lehman's stock began to absolutely tank. The market grew super suspicious. Competitors caught on to the smell of blood and completely stopped lending to them altogether. That clever little Repo 105 loophole basically became a death sentence because nobody trusted a single number on their financial statements anymore. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. The government scrambled, bailing out other Wall Street giants, but when it came to Lehman, no buyer stepped up, and there was absolutely zero political will for a bailout. So they fell. And when they hit the ground, the impact was catastrophic. Look at the contrast here. On one side, you have the Lehman executives in their luxury boardrooms juggling balance sheets and hiding debt. But on the other side, the brutal, real-world impact on Main Street. When Lehman filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy on September 15th, which, by the way, was the largest in American history, 25,000 employees lost their jobs instantly. The entire global financial system just froze in terror. Suddenly, totally unrelated everyday businesses couldn't borrow money to make payroll. And average, hardworking families saw their life savings and their home equity just completely evaporate.
This collapse triggered a massive domino effect that sent the entire world into the deepest recession since the Great Depression. I mean, this number is almost impossible to even comprehend. $10 trillion. $10 trillion! That is the amount of global wealth totally wiped out by the crash. The gorilla of Wall Street was finally brought to his knees, and he took the illusion of financial invincibility, along with the livelihoods of millions of people, down with him.
Finally, Section 6, echoes of the crash, the fallout and the lack of accountability.
In the devastating aftermath of all this, the public naturally demanded accountability. I mean, the logic was pretty simple, right? Surely executives who knowingly orchestrated a $50 billion cover-up would face some serious prison time. But the legal outcome was a really bitter pill to swallow. Despite exhaustive investigations and just glaring, obvious ethical failures, no senior executives were ever criminally charged for these accounting schemes. The whole scam was just buried in a maze of complex regulations. So the crucial point is, what do we actually take away from the ashes of the house that Henry Lehman built? First off, debt is a massive double-edged sword. Used responsibly, sure, it builds empires, but used to hide the truth, it builds ticking time bombs. Second, transparency isn't just some corporate buzzword you throw on a brochure. It is the absolute, non-negotiable foundation of a functioning, trusting society. And third, we learned the extremely hard way that the biggest risks are very often hiding in the exact places we are told are the safest, like the housing market. Ultimately, the spectacular collapse of Lehman Brothers serves as a stark, glaring warning of what happens when greed outweighs integrity. When financial institutions stop looking at the actual human beings behind the numbers on their spreadsheets, eventually those numbers come back to haunt us all. The shadows of 2008 still loom really large over our economy today, which leaves us with this one vital question. If history truly rhymes, where are we ignoring the people behind the numbers right now? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If you found this deep dive into the hidden forces that shape our world insightful, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more. We'll keep uncovering the fascinating stories hidden just behind the headlines. Catch you next time.